So this hegemony, dominance, leadership by a specific group, seen as superiors to other races or whatever. In this case, you will see in the caste system. So they had limited resources. How did they keep that control without a big army, without so much power to control them? They had ways. So we'll look at two things that really helped this hegemony and dominance and control over the people in the Americas. One was religion. Okay, it was a way to control their minds in some ways. An example to this religion, you can find Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, who was a Mexican nun who died in 1695. And it's very interesting how she represents this dominance and control with religion. She became known in Mexico for her poetry and a woman of her time. She was a feminist. And back in the days, she was this woman who wanted to get an education. She started reading at the age of 3. She was super smart. She had all these ideas, by her defense, towards the knowledge of women, how women should be educated and all that. But back in the days, women were not allowed to even go to the universities. At some point, they said that she tried to cut her hair and look like a boy so she can attend the university. But she was a woman. And as a woman, you had two choices, either to marry and become a mother or wife, or become a nun. And she chose to become a nun because when you're a nun, you have access to the library. You could read books, and she read many, many books. So she was told by the church to be a woman and dedicate herself to religious devotion and nothing else. She could not defy the social norms alone, and later on, she consented. Ultimately consented to that, because if she was going against the religion, she would be a sinner and lose her soul. So the fathers of the church never used physical force against Sor Juana. They embodied the religious authority, and she was a religious woman. Revolt and disobedience was unthinkable to her. She had to follow that authority because of the religion, which is very interesting. So in the same way that Sor Juana was, submissive to the religion, in the same way the indigenous people and the African slave in Latin America gradually accepted the principles of the authority, Iberian authority, and the religion. So historians explain this domination and hegemony by consent. All the people in the Americas were, they gave their consent to be under this control. Hegemony contrasts with control by violence or force. It's more like a mental thing. And you will see what kind of tactics they use to do that. The way it seems like very soft, but it really damages people. Because imagine they're accepting their own inferiority and knowing their place, which is very sad, right? Religion offers the clearest example to this hegemony, and religion is what kept the order. Okay, even with the caste system, you will see. African slaves and indigenous people accepted the Europeans' true religion, which is Christianity, and the Spanish and Portuguese reigned by a divine right. So they had the divine right to be at the top and rule over the people who were inferior, right? Anyways, the royal government built churches and collected the tithe. Tithe is a tax. 10% of all the paid on agricultural products, you would have to give it to the church. 10%. And all educational institutions were religious. So you can see how involved the church was in the society. And the church monopolized the power of knowledge. Okay. The Inquisition, which is an institution that was created by the Catholic kings to go after anybody who was non-Christian or not true Christian, or anybody who was not a true, pure blood Christian. So the Inquisition had banned books at this time already in the Americas, but it would go away little by little over time in the Americas. It wasn't as intense as it was in Spain, with the Inquisition. Religious holidays marked milestones throughout the year. So imagine celebration of Epiphany, which is January 6th, El Día de los Tres Reyes, the Day of the Three Kings was celebrated. That'd be that one mark. Carnaval or Carnival in February, to Lent, 6 weeks before Easter, right? And Holy Week and Easter mark the calendars of religious holidays. And also individual milestones is by religion. If you think about baptism, marriage, death, everything was done by the church and were validated by the church sacraments and registered records done by the church. Okay? So you have the religion keeping the control, and saving souls. And number 2 will be patriarchy, which means fathers rule, men, okay, men rule. Fathers ruled heaven and earth, cities and families, they say. Male hierarchy at church, you have husbands had legal control over their wives and over their children. Okay, they couldn't do anything without the consent of the male in the family, whether it's a father or a husband. And honor, which means sexual purity, was a measure for women, not for men. So only women had to have honor. And the men would lose honor if the woman lost their honor. So a man could have many mistresses and have his reputation go up. However, a man had to defend the virginity of their daughters and their wives, the sexual exclusivity of their wives, as they say, to defend their honor. Very, very one-sided, huh? And women without property, how sad. So if you're poor, you lack honor by definition, because they worked as cooks, laundresses, and market women moving around the street. You didn't have honor, which is sad, or you had less honor than the noble woman. In some, indigenous and African people accepted Iberian kings as their natural rulers by divine right, and they yielded to religious authority in return for a protected status as Christians. Okay, so they all become submissive to the religion, to the patriarchy, especially the women, and they accept that authority by choice. It's not by force. And women accepted that subjugation under the patriarchal, dominance. In return, they would demand that the men are good providers and strong protectors for women, which is what patriarchy did in this case. This give and take created new Latin American cultures through transculturation. You will see that they're trying to impose this new religion on all these groups that already had their own gods, right? So what's going to happen to that? They become joined together in some way to create something new, as we will see in some of the examples of transculturation, when you mix different cultures and you come up with something new, right, out of those combination of cultures. Transculturation. So the process of called transculturation, you have, for example, in Cuba, you have African, indigenous, and European blended to create something uniquely Cuban, right? The music, for example, in Cuba they say they have a marriage between Spanish guitar and African drums. I don't know if you heard Afro-Cuban music. It has like percussion instruments, but they also have a lot of guitar. And the guitar comes from the Spanish, and the percussion instruments comes from Africa. So I'm going to put a YouTube video that shows the Afro-Cuban music, which is beautiful. I love that music. And in Mexico, you have the Virgin of Guadalupe. What happened? The Virgin, they say, appeared to an indigenous boy on a site already sacred to the Aztec times. So there was an indigenous earth goddess named Tonatzin, and gradually they accepted her and made her the patron of a saint of Mexico. And it becomes La Virgen de Guadalupe. Okay, it's like Tonatzin kind of like joining with Guadalupe, the Catholic religion, and that's the image of Tonatzin that is made into a virgin in the Catholic religion so people will follow, right? The people of the Americas. Cities were organized at this time as checkerboard square blocks. If you go to some of the cities, colonial cities, you will see those square blocks that intersect at the right angle. And around the central square, you'll find always the governor's palace. You could find the city hall, you know, some kind of government building. And then you have the cathedral or a church in any town that you go that is with that colonial model. And of course, there are mansions for the rich families and the bishops, and also the seat of the city council there. The high-ranking centers were Lima, Mexico City, Bogota, and Buenos Aires. And you can see why, right? You have all the viceroyalties there. The viceroyalty of, you know, Peru. You have New Spain. You have Granada and Rio de la Plata, right? Cities were the only places where white people could socialize mostly with each other and maintain, the European culture. They will still maintain the European culture in the cities. The colonization forced the indigenous people to lose their native communities, and a lot of them migrated to mines or estates and building poor housing on the outskirts of the colonial cities. So that's why you have many shanty towns today that comes from back from the colonial times. All these people came to work to the city, whether it's in the mines or in the estates. And of course, they don't have housing, so they just created these like very, poor houses that they just built to survive, right, as shelters for these poor people. Native and African cultures dominate life in the countryside, so transculturations happen sooner than in the urban areas. So in the countryside, you have that mix of natives with the Europeans or Africans with the Europeans, creating all these transculturations faster than in the cities. The transculturations happen in the sugar plantations and haciendas. Less profitable sort of estate is a smaller, right, than plantations, haciendas. Haciendas relied on indigenous workers who earn a small salary or share the harvest, and they produce the local consumption. So in the big plantations, you have slaves, who are living in those, the sugar mill, I guess, headquarters, whatever the place they built. But the haciendas are smaller, so they don't have all the sugar mills and all that, or maybe they have a smaller scale. So the labor is done by the indigenous people, not by slaves, right? And they actually harvested their own food, and they will also produce for the local consumption. As for the bigger plantations, will produce for exporting outside of the local area. Okay, the indigenous people in rural areas lived in their own villages, speaking, Quechua or Quiche or Aymara or Nahuatl. So they spoke their indigenous language. And plantation slaves associated mostly with each other and locked down at night. So you could see that in the countryside, they kept more their cultures, right? Whether it's the African or the indigenous. Urban slaves became more fluent in Portuguese faster, for example, because in the city, they're not in their own quarters, right, with the people of their own kind. They are working in the cities and mixed with the Europeans and all that. Defenders of Indians like Inca Garcilaso de la Vega and Huaman Poma in Peru, they really, really fought for the rights of the indigenous, but always keeping in mind that the Spanish rule and Christianity. So Antonio Vieira, it's in Brazil, he defended the humanity and the worth of African slaves, for example. But at the same time, they're telling them, endure this difficulty because the reward awaits in heaven. So isn't it ironic? It's like you're saying that they're having a difficult life, but they're going to get the reward in heaven. So they never let the Christianity be, outside of that defense. So Christianity was always part of the defense. Okay, that's it for now. We'll start with the fringes of colonization in the next video. Bye.